Today's session is one in a series of web-based Sales Management Association presentations that feature practitioners and thought leaders in the field of sales force effectiveness. The Sales Management Association is a professional association for sales operations and sales management professions. We provide our members with research, case studies, training, peer networking, and professional development. If you're joining us for the first time, we invite you to consider membership in the association and while you're on our site, to look around and see what we're up to. We welcome your involvement in our community. My name is Bob Kelly. I am chairman and founder of the Sales Management Association, and today it's my great pleasure to welcome an excellent speaker, Linda Maxwell from Business Efficacy. I'd like to introduce her, and I'll welcome her to the stage. Linda Maxwell is a chief executive officer and co-founder of Business Efficacy, a consulting practice specializing in sales manager enablement in business-to-business sales organizations of all sizes. For the past 20 years, Linda has led the design and delivery of Business Efficacy's sales management tools, processes, and development services. She is no stranger to our audience, where she's presented on a variety of topics. And we're happy to have her with us. Welcome, Linda Maxwell.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Very much appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, looking forward to your presentation. I'm going to put your slides up and sit back and take a listen. Thank you, Linda.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you talking about sustaining performance-based cultures. In particular, in some respects, I think it's perfect timing. In perfect timing, what I mean by that, it's December 2022. And I think we can now begin to say post-COVID. So maybe it's in our rearview mirror. And as we look at 2023, many sales leaders are asking themselves, so what is it? What is it we need to be doing in 2023 that's really going to matter, that's really going to impact performance? So I think that means today's conversation is really perfect in the sense of reflecting and seeing what are the possibilities. So as we look at this topic, performance-based culture, number of things. One is, I'm sure many of you are actually asking yourself, so does performance-based culture still trump strategy? And if it does, what are some things that are maybe hindering its building, sustaining, acceleration? And what are some of the things that are really working? In other words, things that are impacting positively the culture and what it can do for you. So those questions are real. What's interesting is Business Efficacy kind of steps back and reflects on 2022. We found that performance-based cultures and how can you empower them and accelerate them was one of our top 2 issues that we were spending time on in the last 12 months. Now, that might not sound unusual, but for us who've been in the business, as Bob said, for 20 years, performance-based cultures really haven't been at the top of the list of what sales leaders really want to work on when they engage us. And now, because of the situation, it's at the top. One or the 2 top things that they really want to work on. So it, to us, is then saying that this really does matter. What I'm going to do in the next 45 minutes is try and answer a number of questions for you. Number one, what is going on out there relative to performance-based cultures? Number 2 is, what is it management is doing that's maybe holding back the culture from really having as much of an impact as you would like it to have? And what is it that managers can do that really, as I was mentioning a bit earlier, really accelerate it? So we're going to look at that. And how I'm going to do it is I'm first going to start with the question about what's going on out there. So I'm going to give you a couple of case studies to kind of begin thinking about its impact today. First case study that I'm going to look at is a performance turnaround situation. Now, in this particular scenario, this was an organization that, quite frankly, for about 4 years had not been performing to the level that they wanted to. And what they did is they said, you know what, we're going to turn this around and we're going to start with culture. So they made a decision that they were going to accelerate the turnaround, first starting with culture. So what they did is they defined what are some of the cultural mindsets and behaviors that are working when we use them. They documented those, launched them, and really engaged everybody on those specific mindsets and behaviors. The rest of the story is this particular organization now has had 5 consecutive record-breaking quarters, and they're largely attributing it to this intense focus on culture, in particular the mindsets and the behaviors. And again, that's just a recent today example of performance-based cultures and what could happen as a turnaround. Let me give you another one. This particular case study, again, real life scenario, current, was they were already at high performance. So they were doing a great job and being a high performing organization. But the task that they were given is to stay at the high performance level and actually be ahead of all the competition. This particular organization had a really strong organizational culture, but senior sales management decided that in order to really accelerate performance, they needed to have a subculture. And you'll see with the little visual there, it was called the strategic leadership culture. So they actually got aligned on what was a subculture going to look like that's still aligned with the main culture. So they identified, again, mindset, behaviors, and outcomes. When they did that, they then challenged leadership to really, as it says here, demonstrate on a daily, weekly, monthly basis these mindsets and these behaviors, and to rely upon that first as a means to kind of accelerate performance. The rest of the story on this one is they are doing absolutely fantastic on overachieving on their goals, double-digit growth, ahead of the competition. So it absolutely is what they would say is the core to one of the big reasons they're performing so well and continue to have this huge momentum to really take performance to another level. So now let me give you something, I'm calling it kind of a case study in development. So about 2 months ago, I was invited to be a key presenter at an association. And the association, what they wanted to really talk about was what you see on the right-hand side, powering up performance post-COVID. And the reason the senior people in this association wanted to talk about it is what you see listed there. They were going, you know what, we're still kind of in this situation where we've not been before. And figuring out what leaders need to do to move their organization forward is confusing. We can't look back to see what insights are going to tell us what we need to do. And we're unclear as to how in the world we make these decisions. So they really wanted an opportunity within all the senior leaders of this association to have an opportunity to really explore that. So that's what we set up to do. So during this particular conference, we had a lot of senior leaders, we had a lot of senior sales leaders, senior marketing leaders. What we did is we introduced what are some of the things we're seeing going on out there, but then had them get into breakouts and really discuss what they saw. And that's where it was really interesting and why I call this kind of a case study in development. So one of the things that I did is I shared with them, if you're trying to drive culture, you have to start with kind of the mindset. What are the mindsets that you need? What are the behaviors that go along with that in order to drive the outcomes? And some of you who maybe attend a lot of the webinars that Bob has available, my partner spoke a couple months ago about this topic, how to build a performance culture. So covered how to do that, asked them the questions that you see on the right, and what came back, what their insights were, again, big group of people who are really kind of pondering this, is they go, one, we haven't been assessing culture, hadn't been on their radar. Number two, when they took a few minutes to really look at it, they were surprised at what was really going on within their organizations that they hadn't even been aware was happening. And then number three is they quickly saw, once they, again, took a moment to kind of look at it, that they wanted to and needed to take on culture, because if they didn't, it was going to have a negative impact on performance, much less enabling positive performance. So that was kind of one aha moment. The second thing that we did in this particular conference is we went through what are leaders doing today, kind of what are the emerging transformational leadership practices that are going on out there, and what are things that are within those emerging practices really propelling organizations forward, that performance culture, and what are the things that are kind of holding back. So again, ask them a couple of questions in small groups. Those are the questions on the right. And what came back out of those groups is they became aware of things that management was doing unconsciously that was negatively impacting a performance culture. Number two, what became obvious to them is that they needed to begin using a different means to assess what they were doing as managers in order to determine if they needed to keep doing it or if they needed to change it. And that was about impact, that they needed to begin to look at impact as an assessment means, as opposed to maybe traditionally how they figured out what's working and what's not working. And lastly is they begin to really look at what are the things that are possible that management can do to really impact culture. And there were a lot of things. And oh, by the way, the good news is they weren't necessarily really hard to do. You just needed to be mindful of what they were. So that's why I call this conference kind of a case study in motion, because it really did, as I was listening to what they were coming back with, point out, we call it kind of the rut and the groove scenario, where what's going on right now is in many cases, management is in a rut. In other words, they have a routine that they are doing and they're unaware. They're unaware of its negative impact and or that they're stuck in that rut, as opposed to being in an evolved groove, which really could have a positive impact on the culture, on performance, and on people's success. And the news about a rut or a groove, as we all know, is sometimes if it's really close to you, you can't tell the difference. So part of what we found out is that we all need to potentially begin looking at, is what we're doing a rut that's actually going to be holding us back? Or is it a groove, which is really evolved around what we're doing so that it has a positive impact on the culture and on the performance of our people? So my first self-reflection question that I want everybody who's listening right now to just kind of pause and think for a moment is the one that you see here. So how aware are you of the impact of your actions and how they might be impacting culture? So again, I'm just going to pause for literally a moment and get you to kind of step back and go, so if I really think about my actions, how do I think my actions are either building, sustaining, accelerating a performance culture? Or might my actions actually be hindering a performance culture? So you just kind of maybe do a quick self-assessment there and kind of see where you or the people within your organization are. Because what we're finding is that many managers haven't taken the time to answer that question. It might be on the lower end. And so unconsciously are doing things that are getting in the way. So with that, let me go on to, okay, so now that we know that performance culture still matters, we need to be paying attention. What is today's reality that we need to be aware of, and then think about what we're going to do about it? The things that you see on the screen right now are no news to any of you. We all know that going into 2023, many managers are really faced with how do we inspire, motivate, ignite our people? So there are a lot of situations out there where people are tired, fatigued, compliant. So management's job is, okay, we got to energize this group. The middle one, we've been hearing about it for 2 years almost, year and a half at least, the Great Resignation. And there are still managers out there who are fearful, for example, of holding people accountable because they might lose people. And the one on the right, I'm going to call more of an emerging challenge, which is how do we really get people to execute what needs to be done and get them adopting programs, tools, processes that we've maybe put in place and adopting them more fully so that we're getting the benefit of those tools, programs, and processes. And what's behind that one is, what is it that works these days that sales managers can do that gets execution? So those are some of the challenges, because we're kind of going, not sure. Now, the good news is there's a lot of opportunities out there. And when I say opportunities, I'm going to start on the left there with a productive normal, is we should have the opportunity to finally have COVID in our rearview mirror. And so we do get to, in 2023, build that culture. So now we can formulate what is the culture we want and actually get a productive new normal. So there's a wonderful window on the horizon now to begin taking that on. The one in the middle, breakthrough, going into 2023, again, we have an opportunity to make a decision on where is it we want to focus energy and really get breakthrough from maybe what we've been doing or how we've been doing things. So the opportunity is now to pick what that item is and really bust through, if you want to use that term, to a new level of execution, of performance on a particular focus area. the one on the right is also an emerging opportunity, which is there are an awful lot of colleagues out there at any level who are just saying, I'm ready to go to the next stage. So be it development, be it new challenges, be it a different focus, but they're ready to really try and move beyond. Again, this is kind of the people are tired of what's been going on in the last couple of years. So let's see what something new is that we can really challenge them, develop them, and go to a new level. So those things are all sitting out there. So when we look at today's reality, we have the challenges of the left and we got the opportunities of the right, which goes wide to now is perfect timing to do something about this. So as we do that, as you try and think about, okay, so Linda, where do we go with this? So I get that the opportunity is now. So here's the first thing I'm going to throw out to you as to what the answers might be is, first of all, we're going to begin suggesting that you think about the measure or the diagnostic that you use is impact. The visual that you see on the right-hand side is really trying to articulate that the things that we as leaders, managers, coaches do ideally should have a transformational impact on our people so that they perform. So if we use that lens, the lens of impact, what's possible? And what's interesting is when you use that lens and say, okay, so if I'm using that lens and looking at what I do, and the goal is to really build, sustain, accelerate a performance culture and the performance of my people, what do I see? What do I see? And so what we're going to throw out there to you, assuming that lens, is what we all might need to do within our sales organizations is stop for a moment. In other words, almost kind of like do a timeout. Do a timeout, stop. We might need to assess what are we doing and what kind of impact is it having. Challenge ourselves around what we're doing and seeing if anything needs to change in order to have more impact, and then act on whatever those items might be. So let me dig a little bit deeper in this stop, assess, challenge, and act. Stop is very simply just exactly what it sounds like. We need to pause and we need to recognize that as managers, I'm going to use the term loosely, it's obviously sales managers, leaders, coaches, all those different kinds of things. We need to stop and basically say, okay, it is important that we look at what we're doing and what kind of impact it doesn't or doesn't have. So we need to recognize the need to stop. That's step one. And then we need to become aware of what are the mindsets that we as, again, leaders, managers, coaches have and the behaviors that we're doing. And be able to then pause and say, so what kind of impact is it having? Let me give you an example of this one. I was working with a group of managers a couple of months ago, and we were talking about this, and we were talking about what is it managers need to do to have maximum impact as they're working with each of their people. And we talked about in person, and we talked about camera. And one of the VPs was a female VP, was saying that she doesn't want to turn on her camera because of the amount of effort it takes to be camera ready as she's working with her people. And she was saying, I'm fine with clients doing that, but with my people, I don't have to. And so we just kind of all paused because that was one of those things she wasn't even aware of a practice she was doing that was negatively impacting her ability to add value with her people. It wasn't until we had a conversation about the importance of the eye contact and the visual to impact that she goes, wow, hadn't thought about that. So simple example of the importance of stopping. Number two, it's important to stop and kind of see what we're doing, but then what we need to do is we need to be able to say through the lens of impact, kind of like the example I was just giving you, what is working and not working. So assuming we know where we're trying to take our people, we need to be looking at everything that we're doing and really running it through this lens of, is it working to impact our culture? Is it working to impact the performance of our individual people or not? What is fascinating as you look at this particular exercise that I'm throwing out to you is what we're seeing when we do it. I'll give you another example. Client that I was working with where they were just in the last couple of months saying, you know what, we're trying to get this behavior out of our people. And what used to work really well is when we like put a contest in place or we put a spiff out there, but it's just not working and we don't understand why. Well, reality is some of the things that we did to motivate performance or drive performance aren't working like they used to anymore. So we need to be mindful and step back and say, are we trying to go to the same old things that we always did, assuming they're going to give the same outcome? Or do we need to be mindful and really say, okay, it's not working anymore. We need to do something different. So that's what we mean by assess. Make no assumptions. Third thing we need to do is yes, stop. Yes, assess. But then what we need to do is we need to really challenge ourselves and say, okay, based on the assessment, what is it we might need to do differently in how we lead our people, which is about motivation, how we manage, which is about accountability, how we coach, which is about development, how we partner, which is engage other people, and how we direct, which is really focus them. We might need to see where it is we might need to tweak what we do. And are there, quite frankly, any ruts that we've developed in the past couple of years through COVID that we need to get out of? So here's an example. I was working with a newer management team. They had just gotten promoted to management. We're exploring what are some of the things that you really need to do, again, to have impact. And they were asked to go out and try some things. And they came back and they said, you know what, Linda? It is way more effective when you're trying to set expectations with people. If you actually have a dialogue with them, ideally in person, but video works too, as opposed to using email. What had happened in that particular organization, they had gotten accustomed during COVID to setting expectations largely through email. That organization's management team was in a rut around communicating expectations via email. And it wasn't until these people stood back and go, oh my gosh, we need to change this. So that's an example of how we maybe need to make some slight tweaks and really look at what are we doing and how are we doing it, that if we tweaked it, we can make more of an impact. And then, of course, once we've stopped, once we've assessed, once we've challenged, we need to make a decision on what are a couple of things that we're going to do differently in what we do as leaders, managers, and coaches to really drive that culture, drive that individual performance. And as you see on here, it also says measure impact. That is absolutely a lens and a suggestion, and something that we see really working out there is if we begin to evaluate and measure and assess and diagnose what we're doing against impact we're having, it gives us a whole different perspective. So that really does make a difference. Let me again give you an example. Working with an organization, what their managers had done is they began to really do a lot of, obviously, their leading, managing, and coaching remotely. And many of them were believing that they were being very productive by doing that. What was interesting as they really did the kind of exercises that we're talking about here, what they found out is they really weren't as productive as they thought. What they were is they were being more efficient on some administrative things. So amazingly, they were getting more administrative things done, but they were not being as effective in really having an impact with their people. So they had to reset kind of their lens, which is in order to have impact, you have to be efficient and effective and not over-index on that efficiency component. But again, they were just using a measurement that really wasn't giving them the right insight around what they needed to do. So I'm going to, again, give you an opportunity to kind of self-reflect here and ask yourself, how do you think measuring impact would better enable you to determine what adjustments you might need to make in order to more positively impact the culture you want and or the performance you want? And again, this could be for you or it could be for your organization. So just again, pause for a moment and think, what could be the power of measuring impact? Okay, now what we're going to do is I'm going to move on to what I mentioned early on. We're going to look at what are the things that management is doing that is maybe hindering the performance culture. In other words, building it, sustaining it, accelerating it, and what is fueling it. You're going to hear through my whole presentation the word impact, 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 impact. It is really the lens that we think is going to make the difference. So what we've done is we've really taken what are we seeing as best practices out there right now, current 2022, that is working. And we're also going to be looking at each one of these 6 items and say, what does the rut look like? So in other words, what is it managers potentially are doing that is getting in the way of that performance culture, that individual performance growth, and what is fueling it? So we'll go through each one of these individually, and I'll give you examples as we go along. So we're going to start with Ignite Breakthrough Execution. What that's all about is making sure that our people really are focused on a behavioral expectation that has to be really well executed. So it's like energize them about what that is. What you see on the left-hand side are what we would call in our company right now, we're calling them ruts. Ruts management is in that they don't even know its impact. And the things that are going to be on the right, what are the kind of emerging things that are really working? If you look at the ones on the left, no surprises on what you see there, because obviously accepting mediocrity is not a good thing, and letting people snap back to what they're comfortable with is not exactly going to get you performance. Let me give you an example of how that happened through COVID. A scenario where more than one organization, I'm thinking of one in particular, what they were doing in order to not have their people get discouraged during COVID, they said, you know what? Get to 70 to 80% of your performance. That would be like really good. And the reason they were doing that is because it was feeling impossible to get to 100%. So what they did is they said, let's have everybody really push for 70 to 80%. And guess what? They hit that. Well, guess what? That has now become the norm. The 70 to 80% has now become the target or the goal or the acceptable in this culture. They're in a rut with that 70% right now. And they need to recognize, obviously, they have to get out of that rut. On the right-hand side, what is really working right now is when management takes the time and opportunity to really get clear with individuals on what is that behavior, that specific behavior that really needs to be better executed, that would kind of break through the performance and really kind of ignite their success. What is that? And oh, by the way, not just what the behavior is, but what's the mindset? So much about 2023 as an example is going to be, how are we as leaders defining the behavior, but what's the mindset that has to go with that particular behavior in order to get breakthrough? Example of that, again, this is during COVID. So about 12 months ago, manager comes into a situation where the performance of the team is just way bad. And this is exactly what he decides to do, even in the midst of COVID, in a really bad market situation. Got the people focused on 2 to 3 really important behaviors, made sure that everybody was really clear on what it looked like, and then almost prescribed the mindset around how people needed to think about, yes, we can, and the evidence that went along with, yes, we can do these things. You know what the story is going to end with, right? Is total turnaround, and now one of the highest performing teams. And they would say it's because of this intense focus around not accepting, to the opposite of the other side, mediocre, but only accepting high performance, because that's what we can be if we decided to. So going on to the M, maintain the course. Maintain the course in some respects is, once you've set the execution expectation, is staying the course, just kind of staying on it and really making sure that people don't get off track. The the rut side on the left there, again, came as a result of COVID. So during COVID, there's no question that management teams had to constantly kind of be readjusting. We all did. And people got distracted because of all the changes that were constantly going on. The rut is, if that's still how the manager operates, constantly changing the direction, what we're doing, what we're focusing on to kind of move forward. And the manager, along with people, gets distracted anytime there's something new and different that's going on out there that maybe isn't a positive thing. There's plenty of those things going on out there. So I see it very frequently. I can give you examples of managers. One in particular, I'll just give you a story on. Pre-COVID, he was the highest performing management team in the organization, and he's currently at the very, very bottom. And the reality is, part of it has to do with the inability to get out of this rut. He, along with his people, constantly are changing and therefore are not being able to stay the course on anything that really matters that would get them out of the performance slump that they're in. On the right-hand side, breakthrough and what was really required. I mean, the simplicity of it is once you've picked something that really matters that has to be really well executed, is you don't give up on it. You just stay on it, stay on it, stay on it. That's in essence the new groove, is to stay with something through whatever in order for it to really excel. The key thing on this one is that as you coming out of COVID, as you pick what that execution behavior really needs to look like, we need to step back and really adjust. How do we lead and manage coach it? Because it's going to require an intense focus on our part to really make it happen. And we need to adjust maybe how we've been doing things during COVID in order to really optimize the focus on whatever has been picked. Example of that particular case is a strategy being launched by a particular organization, and one of the managers with the new strategies absolutely executing what is here and just really stayed on it at a level that the peers, the other managers weren't. Guess what happened? That manager's team is just shooting through the ceilings on a positive performance. The culture of that person, that manager's team, is performance. We will stay with it. We will achieve, because that's just what they do. So the staying with it would be what all of them would say was the secret to their success on a breakthrough behavior that was identified. Prioritize the critical few. So this one is all about, there's so much to be done right now. If there's a common theme out there, is everybody is feeling that there's so much to be done. Well, management's job is to really prioritize the critical few if we want a performance culture. A performance culture is always laser beam focused on what matters most. The rut that might be going on, again, partially due to COVID, is organizations right now are really trying to help their people. So they're giving them tools, programs, processes, training, all this stuff. And at the same time, they're expecting people to be using, adopting all these things. And so without realizing it, because they're saying everything is important, nothing is important. So example of a situation out there right now is an organization really did decide to spend in the last 18 months a lot of money on programs, processes, and tools, and rolled them all out, and is now all excited, kind of waiting for the performance improvement and saying, you got to use all these things. And if you use all these things, everything's going to be wonderful. And the people are overwhelmed with all this, and it's actually caused them to freeze and kind of pause. So it's having the opposite effect. So the rut that management is in is not seeing that more is better. They need to help their people prioritize, which is obviously what we're looking at on the right-hand side. Really figuring out, so the role of management is to figure out what are those really few things that really matter most, and just make sure that we're decking everything against whatever those prioritized items are. And what's fascinating about this one, again, an emerging practice, a new groove, if you want to call it that, is that management might need to actually, with each of the individuals, help them figure out, given those expectations on what matters most, what does that individual need to start doing that they maybe haven't been doing, stop doing that isn't really positively impacting the focus, and or continue to do the way they've been doing it. So it's that taking the time to really figure out how the expectation integrates with their reality, with whoever their direct report's reality is, that's really making a difference. So it's not just prioritizing what are the few things, but helping prioritize how it integrates in the current environment of each of the individuals. So prioritizing is then also kind of taking things off the plate as well, so that people can really figure out how to move something forward. So an example of a positive one on that, this one actually relates to that case study that you saw earlier around sustaining breakthrough performance. That particular executive really did this So in other words, in order to kind of like keep staying way ahead of the competition, that performance culture, but take that culture to another level, what they did is they identified what were the couple of things that really were going to enable them to stay way ahead. So it's a breakthrough behavior. But then the manager had to really help everybody figure out, okay, so how does that behavior that's really important, how does that get kind of integrated into the work? So the start, stop, and continue. And they are the one that is really having amazing success right now because of the prioritization. And that included helping people understand what to stop doing as well as start doing. The next one that we've got here, the answer why, we all know this one. We all know that we have to answer why. So again, as we think about what needs to be done relative to accelerating performance cultures or performance of an individual, what's the rut? The rut is many times we sometimes still think we only have to explain it once, which we know is not true. And the why that we articulate over and over and over again, if we do repeat more than once, is too organizational. I mean, I've seen this, my team sees this all the time as it relates to like CRM systems or technology tools, where we want our people fully adopting these tools. And the answer to why is because it's what the organization wants us to do. It's what the organization needs us to do. And the answer for the individual is left unanswered. That rut, that continual to talk about what the organization needs, is really having a negative impact in today's environment. And we need to, in actuality, get into the new groove on the right hand side there, where we're talking about what is possible through the answering of the why from an individual's perspective. So illuminating why every time people are taking an action so that they can be reminded and they can begin to internalize the benefit of doing what you're asking them to do is extremely powerful. One of my favorite examples relative to this one is working with an organization. They had about 40 managers, and about 4 or 5 months ago, 2 of them kind of hockey sticked their performance. And so I went and interviewed them. I'm always curious as to what is it that gets this to happen, this hockey stick performance, and found out that it had something to do with return to office. Now, before you all jump to conclusions, let me give you the rest of the story. What these 2 managers were doing is they were encouraging people not to, quote, return to the office. What they were doing is saying, we need to get a certain kind of better problem solving, more innovation, more learning. And so what they were doing is saying, in order to accomplish those objectives, we need to maybe have in-person meetings. So they had a purpose for the in-person meeting, really strictly designed kind of what the agenda was so that the purpose of the meeting, the objective, would get accomplished. And then they have people self-reflect on, so what was the impact of actually coming together as we were trying to accomplish the objective? And they just kept doing that over and over and over again. So they were getting people to come back to the office for very specific purposes to gather. And then once they were doing those gatherings and accomplishing the objectives, getting them to self-reflect on the impact of getting together in person. They did this so well that reality is now they are a more productive culture than they were pre-COVID. Because now people don't just connect because they are running into each other. They are intentional around getting together with peers, with resources from other departments, but they are now proactively ensuring, here's the objective, let's do it in person, because here's the outcome we want. So they're actually increased their culture because of that mindfulness, that intentionality of meeting together in person with very specific objectives and agendas. And the way both of these managers did it, it was by making sure that people understood the why are we doing something. Then we've got the celebrate success, celebrate progress. I'll just kind of net this one out around the ruts. The ruts that are out there, we all know that we need to be celebrating progress with our people, but the ruts that are out there is there's still an awful lot of us are hoping that some of the things that we've done in the past will work. I gave you an example earlier of a situation where they're saying, you know what, these incentive programs aren't working like they used to, or this competition or these stack rankings, it's because that's a rut. And or the things that we used to say, like, great job, way to go, that's not what people are wanting today. People are wanting much more high value feedback and interaction. So a rut relative to celebrating success is thinking that the old ways still work, when what people are really wanting, the emerging practice that's really working around building a performance culture or taking an individual's performance up, is what you see on the right-hand side. So really customizing that feedback that you're giving with quality detail that really helps people be energized around what they're doing. And it's not just about the sale, for example, because there is so much transformation that's needing to be done right now. People need much more and better quality feedback about their progress and their effort than we ever have in the past. So really, quality leaders who are having maximum impact are really doubling down on what you see on the right-hand side there. And then last but not least, we've got T for impact, take it on. This is all about the courage, the boldness, the proactiveness of leaders to, when they see something not happening, to have the discussion at that point in time. What you see on the left, ruts, and we're seeing a lot of this out there, which is, as organizations or managers ask people to do something, they're really hesitant to potentially have accountability conversations because they're concerned about people potentially leaving. And therefore they are, again, I'll call it a rut behavior, kind of waiting and hoping that people will kind of step up when they're comfortable with whatever it is. And that is really having a negative impact. I mean, I was hearing about a story not too long ago where there was negative behavior happening within a sales organization, and the manager was in this rut, let the negative behavior go. The people that were doing the right behavior stopped doing the right behavior because the negative behavior was being allowed. So that's a really toxic scenario that we need to be mindful that we're not in that rut. The good rut not the rut, the groove on the other side is, we really need to be having those quality, proactive accountability conversations where we're sitting down with our people and really talking about what's getting in their way, what's working, what's not working, and how can we help them get over that speed bump, get over that challenge, whatever it is, but taking the time to make sure those conversations are happening, and that we're adding real relevant value to moving somebody forward. That's part of a performance culture. Scenario that I have on that particular one is there was a team that was really not performing 12 months ago, and the manager decided to go after this and absolutely got very proactive, engaged, and frequent in having these kinds of dialogues, and made it one of those things where this is together how we are going to become a performance team. This is how we have a performance culture. And it just became the way that they did it. 12 months later, every one of the people is hitting 100%. And it's largely because the manager chose to get in this groove that you see on the right-hand side. So with all that I've been covering here today, what are some of the key takeaways when we think about sustaining performance culture today? 3 takeaways. Hopefully what you're seeing is that, yes, performance cultures really do matter, and it is a key to success. Number 2 is we really need to be using this lens of impact. It is about, is what you're doing having an impact on the culture and on the performance of the individuals? And the groove behaviors are the ones that you see listed, but we need to make sure that we're in the groove and not in the rut. And in order to make sure that we're in the groove and not in the rut, we need to stop, we need to assess, we need to challenge, and then we need to act. So that would be what I'd be encouraging all of you as the early of December, and we're thinking about 2023. What can we do to really build, sustain, accelerate that performance culture and the performance of our people? Really pretty simple, but it is going to require that we maybe pause, look, and do some things differently. The offer that I have, Bob, as I close this out, is there are 3 different webinars that we've been putting together for SMA. And if anybody is interested in us doing one of those with their team, we are happy to make that available to anybody.